Daniel was a boy who lived in a restless city. The streets were always crowded with rushing people. The air was filled with the endless roar of cars. Tall buildings blocked the horizon and hid the sky. From morning to night, the world around him never seemed to stop. But inside, Daniel always felt strangely empty. Every morning, alarms screamed beside his bed. He dragged himself up, still tired, before the day began. At school, he hurried through lessons without paying attention. During lunch, he ate quickly, eyes fixed on his phone. Every evening, he scrolled through videos until his eyes burned. Yet no matter what he did, his heart remained restless. One afternoon, walking home on a different path, Daniel noticed something unusual. At the end of a narrow alley stood a broken iron gate. It was covered with vines, half hidden like a secret waiting to be found. He pushed it gently, and it creaked like an old whisper. Behind it lay a forgotten garden, wild and silent. Weeds covered the ground, and branches lay broken across the path. And yet, even in the ruin, Daniel saw something that made him pause. A single rose grew in the middle of cracked soil. Its petals were fragile but determined to bloom. Daniel stepped closer, surprised by its beauty in such neglect. For the first time in years, he heard no traffic, no noise, no voices. Only the sound of leaves rustling softly in the wind. The next day, curiosity pulled him back to the garden. He sat under a crooked old tree, closing his eyes. For the first time, he simply breathed in silence. But soon, his eyes noticed small details. The soil was thirsty, dry, and cracked. A hidden path was buried under weeds, waiting to be cleared. Something inside him whispered words he couldn't ignore. This place needs care. This place needs love. He bent down, pulled a handful of weeds. He cleared a few stones from the ground. From his school bottle, he poured water on the dry soil. It was a small effort, but it felt meaningful. When he returned the next day, Daniel was shocked. In the corner where he had poured water, tiny shoots of green appeared. They were fragile but alive, stretching toward the light. He felt a spark of joy rise in his chest. It was small, but it was real and powerful. He whispered to himself, "Maybe I can save this place." Weeks turned into months as Daniel kept returning. He borrowed books about gardening from the library. He carried small tools hidden in his backpack. He brought seeds to plant in the soil. After school, while his friends rushed home to screens, Daniel worked quietly, trimming branches and planting flowers. Slowly, life returned to the forgotten garden. Butterflies fluttered above blossoms in the sunlight. Bees buzzed gently, carrying life from flower to flower. Vines climbed the broken fences with new strength. Colors spread where once there had only been weeds. As the garden grew, Daniel's heart began to heal. One evening, his mother followed him in secret. She stepped through the old gate and stopped in awe. The weeds were gone, replaced by blossoms. Birds sang from branches heavy with green. Her son stood in the middle, smiling with dirt on his hands. She whispered, "Daniel, did you do all this?" Daniel nodded shyly, embarrassed but proud. His mother's eyes filled with tears of joy. She hugged him and said softly, "I haven't seen this peace on your face in years." That night, she told him about his grandfather. He too had loved gardens and cared for soil. He always said, she smiled, "A heart is like soil. If you neglect it, weeds will grow. If you care for it, it will bloom." Encouraged by her words, Daniel invited his friends. At first, they laughed at him. Why waste time digging in the dirt? They teased, but when they saw butterflies landing on flowers, they grew curious. When they tasted fruits growing on the vines, their eyes widened. One by one, they began to help him. Each friend took a small patch to care for. Some planted flowers, some cleared paths, others watered roots and built small wooden benches. Laughter and footsteps filled the forgotten place. Children chased butterflies under the shade of trees. The garden was no longer silent, it was alive again. The lessons Daniel learned were deep and lasting. He realized weeds were like anger and jealousy. If left alone, they would spread and choke everything. He saw that, just as soil needed water, the heart needed kindness. He noticed that just as flowers needed sunlight, people needed hope. The forgotten garden became his greatest teacher. Years passed, and the garden flourished even more. Trees grew tall, giving shade to tired travelers. Vines carried sweet fruits for children to eat. Flowers painted the air with color and fragrance. Elderly neighbors came to sit and rest peacefully. The garden had become a treasure in the noisy city. One day, a stranger visited and asked Daniel, "Why did you spend so much time here? You could have chosen easier things instead." Daniel smiled gently, wiping soil from his hands. "Because when I healed this garden, I healed myself. This place taught me that peace comes from caring and giving." The moral of the story is clear and powerful. Life is like a garden. If you neglect it, weeds of anger and sadness will grow. But if you nurture it with patience, kindness, and love, it will bloom. Daniel's forgotten garden reminds us of our own hearts. Each one of us carries a garden inside, waiting to be cared for. There was a small village divided by a wide river. The river was calm, but it separated families and friends. People had to walk miles around to meet each other. For many years, the villagers wished for a bridge, but no one took responsibility, so nothing changed. The river became a silent wall between hearts. In that village lived two brothers, David and Thomas. They once loved each other deeply and worked side by side, but a misunderstanding grew into anger between them. A harsh word was spoken, then another and another. Soon, they stopped speaking altogether. One lived on the east side, the other on the west. Neighbors watched with sadness but said nothing. Everyone knew the brothers had once been inseparable. Now they passed each other like strangers across the river. David built fences near his farm so he wouldn't see Thomas. Thomas avoided crossing paths, pretending not to notice. Bitterness grew like weeds, choking their hearts. One morning, David saw an old carpenter passing by. The man carried tools, strong wood, and nails. David called him and said, "Build me a tall fence. I don't want to see my brother's face again." The carpenter nodded quietly and began his work. David walked away, thinking the fence would protect him. But the carpenter didn't build a fence. Instead, he began laying wooden planks across the river. He hammered, measured, and worked from sunrise to sunset. Villagers gathered, curious about what he was making. By the end of the third day, the work was done. It was not a fence, it was a bridge. When David returned, he was shocked. The carpenter stood smiling beside the finished bridge. David shouted angrily, "I told you to build a fence." The carpenter replied gently, "I built what you needed, not what you asked." Before David could argue, he saw Thomas walking. His brother was crossing the bridge with tears in his eyes. For a moment, both men froze at the center. Neither wanted to speak first, pride holding them back. Finally, Thomas whispered, "After all these years, you still cared." David's eyes filled with tears he had hidden too long. He answered, "I was wrong, brother. I missed you." They embraced, and the villagers cheered with joy. The carpenter quietly picked up his tools. David ran after him and said, "Stay with us. You've given us more than we can repay." But the carpenter only smiled and shook his head. "I must build more bridges in more places. People everywhere need help finding." Their way back, the villagers never forgot what they witnessed that day. The bridge stood as a symbol of forgiveness. Children played on it. Families crossed it happily. It reminded everyone that fences divide, but bridges unite. David and Thomas worked together once more. Their laughter returned to the village like sunshine after rain. Years later, travelers who visited the village asked, "Who built this beautiful bridge across the river?" The villagers always replied with the same words. It was built by a carpenter with wisdom in his hands, but it was held together by forgiveness and two hearts. That story spread far beyond the village. The moral of the story is simple, yet timeless. In life, we all face misunderstandings and pain. We are tempted to build fences to shut people out. But fences bring loneliness, not peace. If we dare to build bridges, we heal wounds. Forgiveness is the plank, love is the nail, and trust is the rope. When you forgive, you are not excusing the hurt. You are freeing yourself from the prison of anger. When you build a bridge, you give life another chance. You give people the chance to walk back to you. The world has enough fences made of pride. What it needs are bridges built with kindness. So remember David, Thomas, and the carpenter. Remember the day the fence turned into a bridge. And remember that no wound is too deep to heal. No distance is too wide if love builds the path. Be the one who lays the first plank, because when you build a bridge, you also save yourself.